cool stories.
As a slay queen, you are only into rich men. I will give you money, but there is a catch. I will take your soul in return.
Adanma was a vision of elegance, tall, radiant, and effortlessly captivating. Every inch of her being had been sculpted for admiration. She walked with the grace of a queen, her long legs swaying beneath flowing designer gowns, her skin glistening like polished bronze in the Lagos sun. Men turned their heads, women whispered behind her back, and social media influencers often used her photos as aesthetic inspiration. But Adanma was not born into luxury. She had earned it through charm, calculated relationships, and her unwavering dedication to the soft life. The soft life, as Adanma often defined it to her admirers, was a lifestyle free from labor, stress, or responsibility. It meant waking up in silk sheets, brunching in high-end restaurants, and shopping for items with no regard for price tags. But above all, it meant never lifting a finger for money, only choosing wealthy men who could afford to pamper her. Her philosophy wasn't unique. In fact, Adanma belonged to an elite group of women who shared the same ideology. They called themselves the Elite Daughters, a discreet social circle composed of Lagos's most desirable women. Every member of the group had one thing in common. They were experts in seduction, luxury, and survival. Their meetings often took place in private lounges, spa retreats, or on yachts owned by their current suitors. Among them were her closest confidants, Nkechi, ambitious and cunning, Tayo, playful and light-hearted, and Bimpi, discreet but dangerously intelligent. Together they plotted their ascents up Nigeria's economic and social ladders, one rich man at a time. Despite the glamour back home, Adanma's reality was a quiet contradiction. Her parents lived in a modest bungalow in Surulere. Her father, Mr. Anozie, was once a proud civil servant, but years of illness had reduced him to a weak, bedridden man. His voice, though frail, still held the tone of a man who had known dignity. "Adanma," he called one evening from his bed, struggling to lift his head from the pillow, "you must find something honorable to do with your life. You have brains. Use them." Adanma sat across the room, scrolling through her phone, barely glancing at him. "Daddy, we've had this conversation before," she said, coolly. He continued, undeterred by her indifference. "What you call a soft life is an illusion. You will not be young forever. Beauty fades, but character and purpose remain." Before she could respond, her mother, Mrs. Anozie, entered the room, a tray of medication in hand. "That is enough," her mother snapped, setting the tray down. "You are sick, not stupid, but sometimes you sound like both." Her husband looked at her in stunned silence. She turned to him, arms folded. "This girl is feeding us. She is paying your medical bills, putting food on this table. What job have you done in the last 5 years? Let her live the life that takes care of us." Adanma stood quietly and walked out of the room, her heels echoing on the tiled floor. Her mother followed with her eyes, not with concern, but with pride. "Do not discourage her," she said firmly. "You should be thanking God that your daughter is wise." Mr. Anozie lay back on his pillow, feeling a deeper ache than what illness had ever inflicted, an ache born of helplessness and disappointment. Outside, as Adanma stepped into the waiting Mercedes-Benz parked in front of the house, she called Tayo. "Something big is coming," she said into the phone, putting on her sunglasses. "I can feel it." And indeed, something was. The night was drenched in opulence. Crystal chandeliers glittered above rows of mahogany tables dressed in white linen and gold-trimmed cutlery. The venue was a private estate on Banana Island, accessible only by personal invitation and verified credentials. Nigeria's elite were gathered for what was whispered to be the event of the season, a discreet charity gala organized by an oil magnate's daughter. But beneath the surface of philanthropy, It was a display of power, influence, and unimaginable wealth. Adanma entered the hall like a phantom of elegance, draped in a floor-length emerald gown that hugged her body like second skin. Her diamond earrings shimmered with every graceful turn of her head. Eyes followed her. Cameras clicked discreetly. But she was not there to be admired. She was hunting. She moved with intention, positioning herself near the circle of power, men in agbadas embroidered with threads of gold, women adorned in couture, laughter polished, and conversations cloaked in subtle arrogance. And then she saw him. Chief Nnadozie. He was older than most of the other men, perhaps in his early 60s, but he carried himself with the presence of a king. He wore a custom red isiagu with lion motifs and coral beads wrapped tightly around his neck and wrists. His cap, thick and richly embroidered, sat firmly on his head like a crown. There was something unsettling yet captivating about his demeanor. He barely spoke, but people leaned in when he did. No one interrupted him. No one corrected him. He was, without doubt, a man who wielded power without apology. There were many rumors about him. Some said he was a silent partner in the country's biggest telecom firm. Others whispered about offshore accounts, international real estate, and private jets that never touched Nigerian soil. But what bound all the stories together was one truth. No one knew exactly how Chief Nnadozie had made his fortune. He simply existed at the summit of Nigerian wealth. Adanma studied him from across the hall, calculating her next move. She laughed a little louder when Tayo whispered something into her ear. She positioned herself beside the wine table just as he passed. She leaned forward deliberately, brushing against him with calculated innocence. "I beg your pardon, Chief," she said, her voice soft yet controlled. He turned slowly, eyes meeting hers. "It's quite all right," he replied, his voice gravelly and deep. "I should be more careful with such royalty in the room," she smiled. He observed her quietly, then gestured to the waiter behind him. "Get her whatever she wants." That was all it took, an unspoken invitation, a green light. Within a week, Adanma was invited to one of his private residences in Victoria Island. She was flown in by helicopter, no entourage, just her and Chief Nnadozie. The residence was more palace than home, marble floors, gold fixtures, wall-sized artworks, and silence, too much silence. But she was not intimidated. She had studied men like him, give them warmth, give them mystery, make them feel young again. And it worked. Within days, she had become a permanent fixture in his world. Their relationship evolved quickly. He did not woo her with poetry or affection. He conquered her with gifts. A Cartier watch the next day, a 12-day trip to Monaco the next week, a fully furnished apartment in Lekki Phase 1 with 2 domestic staff by the end of the month. For Adanma, it was paradise, but for her family, it was a miracle. One bright morning, a white Lexus SUV arrived at her parents' gate. A uniformed driver stepped out and handed over a key to Mrs. Anozie, along with a handwritten note. For the head of the house. Her father, seated on the veranda, struggled to his feet with the help of his walking stick. "I don't need a car," he said, refusing the key. "Take it back." But her mother snatched it from the driver's hand. "He is sick," she said firmly. "He doesn't know what he's saying." The driver smiled and walked away. Later that evening, as the car engine purred in the compound, Mr. Anozie sat in silence. His wife was inside, exploring the features of their new car like a child with a toy. His daughter had sold her soul for wealth, and his wife had gladly handed over the receipt. He looked up at the sky and muttered a quiet prayer. But far away, in a mansion guarded by silence and gold, Adanma laid on silk sheets next to a man whose past was darker than she could have ever imagined. And her questions were only just beginning. Adanma had everything she had ever wanted, but for the first time in her life, she began to feel something she had never felt before: unease. Chief Nnadozie was generous to a fault. he lavished her with wealth beyond imagination. Her apartment was now fully staffed with a chef, a driver, a cleaner, and a personal assistant. Her wardrobe overflowed with luxury fashion, Dior, Versace, Balmain. Jewelry boxes, stacked like treasure chests, glittered in every corner. He even paid for her younger brother's university tuition, though she never asked. But behind the grandeur lurked something unnerving. He never slept at her place. When she visited his estate, there were entire sections of the house she was not allowed to enter. One particular hallway was always locked, thick, antique double doors bound with iron handles and guarded by a quiet man with no expression. There were no photographs of Chief Nnadozie in his youth, no family portraits, no mention of siblings, children, or a former wife. His phones were always encrypted, his meetings always behind closed doors, and his staff never spoke freely around him. What truly began to disturb her, however, was his behavior during full moons. On those nights, he would disappear entirely. No calls, no messages, no drivers. The first time it happened, she assumed he had traveled. The second time, she noticed his security detail doubled. The third time, she followed him. She instructed her driver, discreetly hired outside of Chief's knowledge, to tail the convoy. The black Range Rovers moved swiftly but deliberately through the darkened streets of Lagos before exiting the city and heading toward an isolated stretch of land near Ogun State. There, nestled between dense forest and swamp, was a compound surrounded by high red walls and thick smoke rising into the night sky. Before the driver could get closer, two men emerged from the shadows, staring directly at them. Her driver panicked and reversed instantly, heart pounding. "Madam, I beg you in the name of God, never ask me to drive there again." That night, she couldn't sleep. The next morning, Chief appeared at her apartment, smiling and well-dressed, bearing an expensive gold chain. "You weren't picking your calls," he said. "My phone was on silent," she lied. He placed the chain around her neck, kissed her forehead gently, and left. Adanma stared at the door long after he was gone. A voice inside her whispered, "Ask him. Ask him what he does. Ask him who he really is. Ask him why you feel like you're falling into something you can no longer escape." Later that week, during dinner, in one of his secluded lounges, she finally did. "Chief," she began cautiously, "you've done so much for me. More than I deserve, but I can't help wondering, what's the source of all this? The cars, the homes, the money, the connections?" He paused mid-bite, lowered his fork, and dabbed his mouth with a napkin. He didn't look angry, just tired. "Why do you ask?" "Because I don't want to be blind to what I'm part of," she said softly. "If I'm walking in your world, I need to understand it." His eyes lingered on hers. "Curiosity," he said slowly, "is how people end up in places they shouldn't be." "I just want the truth," she whispered. A long silence fell over them. The only sound was the ticking of a grandfather clock behind her. He stood up. "Follow me." He led her through a passage she had never seen before, down a stairwell lined with ancestral masks, red candles, and strange symbols painted on the walls. At the end was a heavy wooden door. He unlocked it with an iron key from around his neck. Inside, the air was thick with incense and something else, something foul. Adanma's breath caught in her throat. Chief Nnadozie turned to face her. Slowly, he reached for his cap and pulled it off. What lay beneath was not human. The top of his head was caved in like rotting wood. Patches of hair hung from skin that had decayed. Maggots squirmed in and out of holes in his scalp. A foul stench rose from his head, causing her to choke and stagger backward in horror. She screamed. The sound echoed off the walls like a warning. He said nothing for a moment, letting her tremble and fall to the floor, her body unable to move. Then he spoke, calm, emotionless, final. "No one sees what's under my cap and survives." She stared at him, frozen in terror. "You asked for the truth," he said. Now you have it. I am rich because I am not bound by your world's rules. I belong to something older, something ancient, something that feeds on the living. Her lips quivered. What do you mean? You have 2 weeks, he said, before your body begins to decay. You will die, painfully, slowly. That is the price. You are now a sacrificial lamb. My wealth demands offerings. Your curiosity has offered you. She shook her head in disbelief, tears streaming down her face. He walked past her, placing the cap gently back on his head. And one more thing, he added as he opened the door. If you tell anyone, they will die too. The door slammed shut behind him, leaving her alone in the dim, cursed chamber. Her screams echoed into the shadows. The nightmares began that very night. Adanma woke up screaming, drenched in sweat, her fingers clawing at her scalp as though trying to peel away some unseen presence. She ran to the mirror in the dim light of dawn and searched her face for signs, any sign, that she was still whole. Her eyes were bloodshot, her lips pale, and her skin looked different. Slightly ashen, almost dull. She scrubbed her face frantically, hoping the color would return, but it didn't. That morning, Lagos bustled outside like it always did, unaware, uninterested. The sun rose over the rooftops, the streets filled with honking horns, street hawkers shouting prices, and motorcycles weaving dangerously between cars. But inside her luxury apartment, Adanma sat curled in a corner, trembling. She didn't know how to make sense of it. It had to be a trick, an illusion, maybe even a threat designed to scare her into obedience. But when she reached into her scalp that evening, idly scratching an itch, her nails came away with something beneath them, a foul-smelling pale smear. Her breathing quickened. No, 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 no! She ran back to the mirror, yanked her hair aside, and gasped. There it was, a tiny patch of rot near her hairline. Greyish, software, almost wet. She covered her mouth with both hands, stumbling back until her back hit the wall. Her reflection stared at her like a ghost, a version of herself on the brink of collapse. In the days that followed, her symptoms worsened. She began to vomit in the mornings, not food, but blackish bile that reeked of sulfur. Her teeth ached constantly. Her nails darkened slightly at the tips, and her skin grew clammy. Perfume couldn't mask the strange smell that clung to her. But the worst part wasn't the physical decay. It was the knowing she was dying, knowing that Chief Nnadozie had spoken the truth, and knowing that she could tell no one. She tried to keep up appearances, forced herself to meet her friends for brunch, attended a private spa day arranged by her assistant, even smiled and posted a filtered picture online. But every moment felt like a betrayal of herself. Her laughter was hollow. Her eyes always drifted toward exits. And when people leaned in too close, she turned her face away, afraid they'd catch the faint smell of rot. One evening, her mother paid her a surprise visit. "My daughter, what is going on? You're shrinking before my eyes," she said, holding Adanma's hands, her voice trembling with concern. "You're pale. You look sick. Have you eaten anything?" Adanma forced a smile and looked away. "I'm just stressed, Mama. I need rest, that's all." But her mother didn't believe her. She watched her daughter's trembling fingers, the darkened veins under her skin, the way she winced when she moved her head. "Let's go to the hospital," her mother insisted. "This is not normal." "I'll be fine," Adanma said. Her voice was faint, her limbs weak. Her mother sighed and stood up. "I'm calling the doctor. I'm not watching my child waste away." The next day, a private physician arrived, well paid and highly respected. He examined her thoroughly, took blood samples, checked her vitals, probed her for symptoms. When he left the room, she overheard him whispering to her mother. "I can't explain this," he said. "There's something wrong with her immune system, but nothing is matching up. Her cells are degenerating, but she's not responding to anything. It's as if her body is giving up." That night, Adanma locked her door and cried harder than she ever had in her life. She buried her face into her expensive pillows, now stained with tears and bile. She reached for her phone. Her fingers hovered over her contact list. Maybe she could tell someone. A friend, a pastor, anyone. But the words of Chief Nnadozie echoed in her mind. If you tell anyone, they will die too. She thought of her mother, her flawed, materialistic, overbearing mother who still, in her own twisted way, loved her. She thought of her little brother, who smiled every time she sent him new shoes. She thought of the driver who took her around without question, the house cleaner who greeted her every morning. What if they died? What if the curse extended even to those who heard second-hand? She couldn't risk it. She sat in the corner of her room for hours, the weight of silence crushing her. Then, as dawn approached, her body convulsed violently. She threw up again, this time blood mixed with bits of black sludge. She collapsed beside her bed, and for the first time in her life Adanma whispered a prayer, not for wealth, not for favor, but for mercy. By the second week, Adanma's world had collapsed into a slow, living nightmare. Her body was deteriorating, her joints ached like rusted hinges, her legs felt heavy. The veins beneath her skin darkened further each day, spiderwebbing from her limbs to her chest. Her gums bled when she brushed her teeth. And no matter how many scented candles she lit, or how many times she bathed in imported oils and salts, the smell of something wrong, lingered. Faint, but undeniable. Death was settling in like an unwanted guest. Still, she said nothing. She wore long sleeves, even in the sweltering Lagos heat. She cancelled outings, avoided visitors, and turned down social invitations. Her friends began to notice the absence. Messages flooded her phone. "Where have you been, babe? Hope you're okay. We miss your vibe." "You ghosted, oh, talk to us." She ignored them all. When she finally responded, it was with a lie. "Just overwhelmed. Taking a little break for my mental health. Love you all." But even her friend's concern couldn't compete with her mother's growing fear. Mrs. Anozie had taken residence in her daughter's apartment, refusing to leave until she saw an improvement. She cooked traditional soups, brought herbal teas, prayed loudly in the living room, and made endless calls to specialists. Still, Adanma worsened. Her mother began calling pastors. They arrived with holy oil, anointed her walls, laid hands on her, and shouted down demons with sweat and fury. None of it worked. Adanma would sit on the edge of her bed while they prayed, her body barely upright, her eyes hollow. She said nothing, did nothing, just waited, counting down days like petals plucked from a dying flower. But her silence didn't go unnoticed for long. Late one night, her mother entered her room without knocking. She stood in the doorway, breathless, eyes rimmed with frustration and tears. "I want the truth, Adanma," she said. "I know something happened. You don't just fall apart like this." "Mama, please, don't lie to me," she snapped. "I carried you for 9 months. I know when you're hiding something. Is it a sickness? Is it drugs? Did someone do this to you? What is it?" Adanma's mouth opened, but no words came. Her throat burned with the weight of what she couldn't say. The truth clawed at her ribs, begging to be released. But the memory of Chief Nnadozie's voice, that cold, final voice, still echoed in her head. "You will die, and anyone you tell will die too." She looked away. "I can't tell you," she whispered. Her mother's voice softened, cracked. "Then at least tell someone who can help. A pastor, a priest, a prophet, somebody who can intercede with God. Please, Adanma." Silence. Tears streamed down both their faces. The next morning, Mrs. Anozie made a decision. "I'm bringing Pastor Emmanuel. He's a man of God. You don't have to say anything. Just let him pray." Adanma wanted to scream no, but she couldn't stop her. She didn't have the strength anymore. That evening, Pastor Emmanuel arrived. A calm man in his late 50s, with greying temples and gentle eyes. He looked at Adanma as though seeing a lost child. He took her hands and prayed quietly. No shouting, no theatrics, just scripture and solemnity. After a long moment he opened his eyes and said, "Whatever is holding you, it is rooted in darkness, but darkness has no dominion over light. If you can speak, speak. The truth can set you free." Her lips trembled. Mrs. Anozie stood nearby, gripping her rosary, nodding at her daughter. Tell him everything." Adanma looked at Pastor Emmanuel, then at her mother. And then she broke. Her voice was barely a whisper, her words slow and broken. She told him about the dinners, the hallway she wasn't allowed to enter, the mysterious compound outside the city. She told him about Chief Nnadozie's cap, the rotting scalp, the maggots, the curse, the 2-week deadline, everything. She said the words like poison leaving her throat, painful, choking, but necessary. For a moment, neither her mother nor Pastor Emmanuel reacted. Then, without warning, Mrs. Anozie clutched her chest and collapsed. "Mama!" Adanma shrieked, dragging herself from the bed. "Mama!" Pastor Emmanuel leapt forward and caught her just before her head hit the ground. Her face was pale, her eyes stared blankly. Her lips twitched once and then stilled. Adanma screamed, her voice ragged and sharp. No, Mama, wake up! I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." But it was too late. Mrs. Anozie was gone. The prophecy had come true. Pastor Emmanuel, trembling, whispered a prayer over the body. Then he turned to Adanma. For the first time, the calm in his eyes was gone, replaced by dread. "You must leave this place," he said. "Now. There are forces at work that we cannot fight here. You have invited a curse upon your life, child, and this curse is hungry." The house was silent. Too silent. The kind of silence that did not comfort but gnawed, that curled around the edges of things, whispering the presence of death. Adanma hadn't moved from the corner of her bedroom floor since the paramedics came and took her mother's body away. They had pronounced her dead on arrival. Massive stroke, they said. But Adanma knew better. She knew what had really happened. The curse had claimed its first soul. Her mother had died just minutes after she spoke the truth. She had begged herself not to speak. She had held on for almost 2 weeks, carrying the burden in her heart, enduring the stench of death and the decay of her own body. But now everything had unraveled. She had no more lies left in her, and now she had only 3 days left to live. She remembered the exact words Chief Nnadozie had spoken. "You will die in 2 weeks. The curse begins the moment you see what is beneath my crown. Your body will reject life, and if you speak of this to anyone, their blood will be on your hands." The words had seemed so fantastical then, impossible, like something out of a bad movie. But her mother was dead, and her reflection in the mirror no longer looked human. Adanma had always been known for her beauty. In fact, beauty had been her weapon, her currency. Her name opened doors. Her face alone had won hearts, landed vacations, invited diamonds into her life. Men gave and gave, competing with one another to claim a piece of her radiance. Now even the mirror recoiled from her. Her skin was discolored, bruised black patches spread like oil stains across her back and abdomen. Her lips were pale, her teeth loosening. Her hair fell out in clumps whenever she touched it. The stench of decay had grown unbearable, a mixture of raw meat and something fouler. She no longer left the bedroom. The curtains were drawn, the air conditioning was off. Every minute felt like a descent into madness. Pastor Emmanuel had not returned. After witnessing her mother's death, he'd promised to return with help. But that had been over 24 hours ago. She tried calling him. His line rang endlessly. Maybe he was scared. Maybe he knew he was next. Adanma was alone. On the second night after her confession, the hallucinations began. At first, it was just whispers, software, inaudible, like wind moving through the trees. Then came the shadows. They danced on the ceiling even when no light was on. At first, she thought they were tricks of the mind, but then they began taking shape, long limbs, sunken faces, eyes without whites. The smell of earth followed them, of something buried, something unearthed. They surrounded her bed each night. One leaned in, sniffing her hair. She could feel its cold breath. "You should not have looked," it rasped. Another reached for her ankles. Its fingers were too long, and it dragged its nails over her rotting skin. "You belong to us now." She screamed. She screamed until her throat tore, but the walls of her room held in her cries, swallowed them like a grave. She tried to run, but her legs buckled under her weight. She crawled to the door, locked it, bolted the windows, lit candles, played gospel songs on full volume, held her Bible to her chest. Nothing worked. Each night they returned. Each night they got closer. On the final day, day 14, her phone rang. The caller ID read Chief Nnadozie. Her heart stopped. She stared at the screen for a full minute, unsure if she was hallucinating. The phone rang again and again. Finally, with trembling fingers, she picked up. She didn't say a word. His voice, as calm as ever, slid through the speaker. "I told you what would happen." Adanma tried to speak, but her tongue felt too swollen. Her mouth was filled with sores. The corners of her lips had split from rot. "Do not hate me," Chief Nnadozie continued. "It is the price of wealth. Every empire requires blood. Some pay with sweat, others with souls. You were a beautiful offering." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "Let this be a lesson for the next generation of women," he said. "When you play near fire, you burn." Then he hung up, and the phone in her hand shattered into pieces without warning, like glass made of ash. At 11:56 p.m., Adanma collapsed on the cold marble floor of her bathroom. By this time, she no longer resembled herself. Her once golden complexion had turned greyish-blue. Her fingernails had turned black. Her eyes were sunken, one of them fully bloodshot. Her spine protruded like sharp ridges beneath her skin. Maggots were now real. They crawled from open sores beneath her breasts, from her scalp, from under her toenails. They moved slowly, like messengers of death taking their time to complete a mission. She tried to crawl to her vanity mirror, to see herself one last time, but her arms gave out. And the last thing she saw, through blurred, watery eyes, was the photograph on her dresser, a picture of her, her mother, and her father at the hospital. Her father had been on a wheelchair. She was smiling. Her mother held her hand. That version of her, the smiling girl, was gone. The next moment, the bathroom lights flickered. A cold wind blew through the sealed windows. And then, silence. Her body twitched once, then stilled. Adanma was dead, but her story did not end there. By morning, the staff who entered her room to bring her food fled the apartment screaming. Emergency services arrived. The building was sealed off. The press came. Headlines followed. Girlfriend of Chief Nnadozie dies in bizarre, decomposed state. Rumors of ritualism, plague death of Lagos socialite. Another mysterious death, spiritual attack or curse. But no one knew the truth. No one knew that beneath Chief Nnadozie's cap, wealth lived beside decay. That in his gold-plated mansion, souls were traded for power. That in a world obsessed with soft lives and fast luxury, some lives are bought and others are devoured. 3 months had passed since Adanma's mysterious death, yet the whispers refused to die. Her funeral had been private, almost secretive. No elaborate display, no media coverage. Just a closed casket, a priest who kept his sermon short, and a few distant relatives who couldn't meet each other's eyes. Her father, Mr. Anozie, attended in a wheelchair, blank-eyed, gaunt, and trembling. He had not spoken a word since the day he lost his wife and only daughter in the same week. Some believed he had suffered a stroke of his own. Others said he was too haunted by what he knew, but could not explain. He hadn't said a word to anyone, not even the doctors or the police investigators who kept asking questions he couldn't answer. Was your daughter into anything suspicious? Had she been sick before the day she died? Do you know who this Chief Nnadozie is? But the old man just sat in silence, breathing, blinking, wasting away. The mansion where Adanma had lived was sold and later abandoned. The new buyers backed out after 2 nights, citing unexplainable disturbances. People claimed to hear a woman crying in the walls. Sometimes a voice would whisper from nowhere, "I didn't want to die." The neighbors began avoiding the property altogether. No one walked past the gates after dark. A cleansing was attempted by a well-known prophet from Kaduna. He and his team arrived with drums, anointing oil, incense, and prayer warriors. But during the session, the lead drummer collapsed and began vomiting live maggots. The cleansing was never completed. The house has remained untouched ever since. Meanwhile, Chief Nnadozie's empire continued to grow. He had announced a new oil refinery deal with foreign investors, and his picture was splashed across magazines, television screens, and social media. Still dressed in his regal agbada and red cap, still smiling, still worshipped. Nobody saw what was beneath the cap. Nobody ever did, at least no one who lived long enough to tell. His foundation donated to hospitals. He funded university scholarships. He was praised as a true Nigerian philanthropist, a man of the people. But if you looked closely, closer than the cameras dared, you might see the faintest shadow move behind his eyes. You might notice how no one ever saw him at night, how his closest aides never stayed in his mansion past dusk, how every few years a beautiful young woman from a humble home in society would vanish, disappearing into silence with no trace. There were whispers in the spiritual underworld that Chief Nnadozie was part of an ancient brotherhood, that his wealth was sustained by death and renewed by sacrifice, that he could not die unless someone who had once loved him cursed him in truth and tears. But who would dare? Who would survive long enough? One night, almost a year after Adanma's death, a young investigative journalist named Tola stumbled across an anonymous tip in her email. If you want to know why Adanma Anozie died, follow the trail of the women who came before her. They were all seen with Chief Nnadozie before they disappeared. Dig deeper, but be warned, what you find may not want to be found. Attached was a list of names, all women, all rumored to have dated the powerful chief, all missing or mysteriously dead. Tola sat back in her chair, her eyes wide, a slow chill moving through her bones. And far away, in a distant part of Lagos, Chief Nnadozie sat in the darkness of his candle-lit inner chamber. He looked at the photograph of Adanma framed on the wall and smiled.